Hello everyone, how are you doing today? My name is Makeda Valletta, also known as the Renaissance Amazon, and I'm here with my lovely beloved father, and we're going to have a good conversation today. Some of you have seen our previous conversations, but so for those of you, well, a lot of you already know who I am. So, I'm very much into history, anthropology, science, the arts. And some of you have heard me talk about my dad. And he was a former history professor, heavily involved in the civil rights movement, very interesting person. And so we're going to have a talk today about how he got involved in the movement.
Award-winning journalist.
Yes, he's an award-winning. So you can introduce yourself.
Twice nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in 2 different areas. Feature writing and explanatory journalism and distinguished commentary. Spent a stint as a journalism professor, and I published a blog, commentaries on Playfellow's commentaries. I did have a blog, commentaries on the Times, but I got in a fight with WordPress, and they took it down. I had 1,400 essays up there, and luckily, I have the essays, but I'm going to have to repost them on my new blog, which is Playfellow's commentaries. But if you look, Playfellow's commentaries. Katie, do you have this on your site?
We'll put that at the...
because if they do, there's a whole long bio on me that you can see with pictures, it's multimedia pictures, everything, essays, all sorts of things. Everything you need to know.
And guys, let me know, make sure that you can hear us. Like, try to speak loud, because since the phone is over there and we don't have a microphone, I also make sure people can hear us. So
I have a magnificent vocal instrument.
You do.
People usually are able to hear me, and if they're not, then we'll have to get a microphone in the future. But
no, I just want to make sure you project.
Ask them if they can hear me.
No, I am. I did ask them that.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Can they hear me?
Yeah, I've asked that. I'm waiting for them to respond.
All right.
So, okay. So, where shall we begin the conversation? Because there's so many things like... Go ahead.
You can begin any way you want to begin, but you had told me that you wanted me to talk about how I became, a black radical activist.
Yeah, so, okay. I'm from Harlem, New York City. My dad is from St. Augustine, Florida, the oldest town in America. When the student sit-in started in the HBCUs, he was a freshman in college. He became a black radical, left the South, went up to Philly. Queen Mother Moore, who a lot of people don't know, Queen Mother Moore, who's an important figure in the civil rights movement, became his mentor.
Pivotal figure.
Yeah, pivotal figure. Became his mentor. And there's a lot of things.
There's a lot of things that happened between then and there.
And he was involved in an organization called Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM, which is an organization that strategically put the Black Panthers together. So he wasn't a Black Panther, but he was a part of RAM, which is the same organization that Assata Shakur was a part of, right?
I was one of the founders of RAM, right? Yeah, she was a part of the Black Liberation Army, which, RAM had, See, the whole... Let me just say this. The Revolutionary Action Movement was the first organization to advocate armed struggle in the 1960s as a political movement. There were people who had taken up guns to defend themselves. In fact, Robert Williams in Monroe, North Carolina, in 1960, he was really our inspiration. And for years, we looked upon Rob as our leader in exile because he had to get out of the country. He went first to Cuba, and then he went to China, and lived there for many years. But Rob was a former Marine Corps sergeant, and he was the president of the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina, which is in itself revealing because, people talk a lot of talk. You hear people talking, on these various videos and what have you, about, what they're going to do and what have you. But the first people to actually take up arms was the head of the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina. And then when you look at the people who actually took up arms in the South, I'm talking about in the South, not posing in California and in Detroit and Chicago, I'm talking about on the front lines with those crackers down there that was trying to kill you for real. The people who actually took them on were almost all like the Deacons for Justice, the defense. They were deacons, in the church. They were mostly church people who had been with the NAACP, what have you, real homegrown Southerners. But anyway, it's a lot that we're way ahead of the story.
Yeah.
For me, people don't stop.
Hold on 1 second. Make sure, some people let me know, put a 1 in the chat if you can hear us okay. If you can hear us fine, put a 1 in the chat. Go ahead.
Revolutionaries don't start out, most revolutionaries don't start out as revolutionaries. Revolutionary movements generally grow out of reformist movements. Take Fidel Castro, for instance. You know, Fidel Castro was a white middle-class lawyer, bourgeois white lawyer in Cuba who was a reformist, who wanted to reform Cuban society, who wanted to get rid of the corruption, who wanted to make it better for working people, you know, who wanted to break the monopoly that the United Fruit Company had on all of the richest agricultural lands in Cuba. He began by putting together a political movement. That is just like the Black Panther Party started out as a political movement in Lowndes County, Alabama. Started out to get people elected to office. That's the same thing that happened with Fidel Castro. And when they won, when his reform movement, democratic reform movement won, and Fulgencio Batista rose up, a military man, overthrew the election, and set up a right-wing military dictatorship, that's when Fidel Castro became a revolutionary. That's when he went to Mexico to be trained in the tactics of revolution, and that's where he met Che Guevara, and that's still Che Guevara, who was an Argentinian. You know, now the United States didn't give a damn about the rights of Cuban people under Batista. They didn't give a damn about the rights of Cuban people under Machado, who preceded Batista. They only started talking about the rights of the Cuban people when Fidel came to power and took the land from the United Fruit Company and distributed it among the peasants. That's when they became concerned. When they ran those rich, white, racist Cubans out of there. The same people that were the parents of assholes like Ted Cruz, like DeSantis, that asshole who's the governor of Florida, you know, like Marco Rubio. Those are the people that Castro drove out of Cuba, what I call Cuban rejects. You know, that's what they are. They ran them out of there. And these are the people that white Americans want to see running Cuba. All these years they've had these boycotts against Cuba. These are the people they want to see running Cuba. And the Cubans say, no, they're not having it. They're not having them back. So they dumped them on us, and now they're our goddamn problem. I mean, I'm from Florida, you know, and this DeSantis, you know, I left Florida because of cracker rednecks. Now, I never go back there because of the damn Cuban rejects. You know, Marco Rubio with a little lying ass. You understand what I'm saying? Marco Rubio ran on the platforms talking about his parents came here running from Castro communism. I have a friend named Olivier Stevenson, a Jamaican, brilliant writer. He was a reporter with the Miami Herald. He decided to just take a look into the history of Marco Rubio's family. He found out that Marco Rubio's family came here before Castro ever came to power. They came here running from the same person that Castro overthrew, you know. But he won't say that, because if he say that, it messes up this narrative that they've got. You know, if you are a Cuban in Miami, the Cuban community in Miami is divided between two groups: the ones who came here before Castro and the ones who came here after. The ones who came here after, all of them got this tale of woe. Oh, we came here because Castro was so terrible and whatnot. Listen, I wrote a piece called The Day After. It's an extensive piece, you know, on Cuba. What Cuba was like before the revolution and after the revolution. I'm going to put it back up online. You'll see these white Cubans, the people that Ted Cruz them came from, you see what assholes they are here, right? They were bigger assholes in Cuba. You know, that's why they ran them out of there. Yes.
So how did you get started?
Well, I grew up in Florida, right? I went to college the same year that Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba. The same year that the Cuban Revolution succeeded, 1959. They came to power, I think, in October or November of 1959. I started in my freshman year, September of 1959. Now, at the time, there was a whole contingent of Afro-Cubans on campus, black Cubans, you know, going to Florida A&M, which was a segregated black university, what they call now, what are HBCUs? Yeah, a cumbersome name. They were black colleges then, all right? And this is where, when I went there in 1959, the most gifted and talented black students in the state of Florida were at Florida A&M. This is the reason why the revolt occurred in these black colleges, because you had all these brilliant and talented black youth in there together. Now here's what happened. When Castro came to power, I didn't know a damn thing about the Cuban Revolution. Cuba was a place where, the adults used to go to celebrate their anniversaries, or things like that. They take a trip. You might take, your sweetheart to Cuba, over Valentine's on this, because it was only 90 miles, and you could just go to Jacksonville, take a plane, and fly to Cuba. So and all I heard about was the party atmosphere. Of course, it was racist as hell. But a lot of the clubs, black Cubans had their own clubs. They had a whole series. Like when you see, there's an orchestra called the Buena Vista Social Club Orchestra. A lot of people see this is one of the Cuban orchestras that play the real Afro-Cuban orchestral music, which you call the son montuno. You can find it on YouTube. Just go to Buena Vista Social Club. People think that's just the name of a band. But the Buena Vista Social Club was a real social club. These black Cubans had their whole system of clubs, that they set up. You can actually go online and not only see the Buena Vista Social Club Orchestra, you can actually see pictures of the Buena Vista Social Club. It was a real place. And you see these elegant black Cubans and what have you. Anyway, Florida A&M had one of the great music programs in the country. Cannonball Adderley, the marvelous, alto saxophonist, Nat Adderley. It's a whole group of wonderful musicians who came out of Florida A&M. You see a great musician like Wynton Marsalis, who can play classical music and play jazz. Well, there was a lot of people at Florida A&M who could play classical music and jazz. We played everything, right? And so these Afro-Cubans who have produced some really, really, really great musicians, the whole group of them came up to Florida A&M. A lot of them were in the music program, but they were studying other things, agriculture and other things. But when the Cuban Revolution succeeded, they rejoiced. They were overjoyed. And so what I saw was the black Cuban students who were there, they were very happy when Castro came to power, but all them southern redneck crackers were scared to death. So Castro became an instant hero of mine. I didn't know shit about the Cuban Revolution. All I knew was that these crackers in Florida were scared to death of him, and that was good enough for me. Because these are some evil crackers. You understand what I'm saying? They were so evil, they drove me away from Jesus. By the time I was 13 years old, I looked at this shit, I say, it ain't no way that no wise and good God can be ruling over this shit, And I went to church. It was on Easter Sunday. I went to the White Cathedral downtown. Now, I wasn't a Catholic, but I had a girlfriend who was Catholic. And I had gone to Catholic school for a year when I was 5 years old, because I was ready to go to school. I was reading like a wizard and what have you, and my mother wanted me to be in school, and the public schools wouldn't take me, so she put me in Catholic school. And I was fascinated with all those rituals they do, especially on Easter, when the priests come out and they got all the candles and the incense, and he's chanting, "Es cum spiritu," and he tell you that the Spirit of God is in the altar. That stuff really fascinated me. So I on Sunday, Easter Sunday, we had our own church, the church of St. Benedict the Moor, a black church, a black saint in the Catholic Church. So our church was the Church of St. Benedict the Moor. We had a school, St. Benedict the Moor, named after the black saint in the Catholic Church. So, but on Easter, they had the big cathedral, St. George Cathedral, downtown St. Augustine. It's still there. But St. George Cathedral is located right across the street from the old slave market. You remember I took you there when you were 13 years old, and I was telling you how when I was a boy, I said, when I was your age, I couldn't sit in this park, and you started crying. You said, "Oh, Daddy, I couldn't believe they treat you like this." I said, "Oh, don't cry about that," because we had our own world. I didn't give a shit. You understand what I'm saying, that I couldn't sit there. But the slave market is right there right now. If you go to St. Augustine, Florida right now, the old slave market is a tourist attraction because it's made of stone and iron. So it's still there, and right across the street is the great Cathedral of St. George. Now, St. Augustine began as a part of the Spanish Empire. St. Augustine was the northernmost tip of the Spanish Empire. It was a sister city with Havana, Cuba. If you go to Cuba,
it was the sister city of Cartagena, Colombia.
Yeah, so when it looked, but when we were in Havana, it looked just like St. Augustine.
Cartagena looked just like
yeah.
No, Cartagena.
Yes, but anyway, the Spanish Empire went from
Sakina saying, hey, Saki.
it went from St. Augustine, Florida, all the way down to Chile, all the way down to the end of the whole Spanish Empire, right? And of course, there's a whole history about that. I'll talk about that at another time, of how, you know, the Spaniards offered freedom to black people who came into Florida and who fought, you know, against these English colonists that became the United States. That's a whole story. You know, that's the tradition I come out of. But in any case, this particular Sunday, I go downtown, and I don't know, for some reason, usually when we pass by the slave market, it didn't have the effect on us that you might think it did. The effect that it had on us was we would look at it. I remember now, we were rooted in black tradition. We were singing, lift every voice and sing at every occasion in the black community. Now, if you've never listened to the lyrics to what they call the black national anthem, we used to call it the Negro national anthem, lift every voice and sing, it was written by the great musician J. Rosamond Johnson, who was a great musician. He was, for instance, the director of music at the London Opera House in 1893. He's a first-rate musician, and his brother, James Weldon Johnson, was a brilliant polymath. And a polymath is a person with expertise in various areas. He was a lawyer, he was a diplomat, he was one of the founders of ASCAP, one of the founders of the American Popular Song. He was a great lyricist. He was a librettist. He wrote the lyrics to musicals. You know, fact is, him, his brother J. Rosamond Johnson, and Bob Cole are among the people who created the American Broadway Theater. They created the American Musical Theater. And he was one of the founding members of ASCAP. Anyway, J. Rosamond Johnson and James Weldon Johnson, the Johnson brothers, they came from right up the road from me, from Jacksonville. And they wrote this song, Lift Every Voice and Sing, as the class song for the first class of black people to graduate from high school in Florida. That was in 1901. All right. Now, James Weldon Johnson, brilliant as he was, had designed the curriculum for the black high schools of Florida. And he said, my objective is to produce cosmopolites. All right. Now, if you don't know what a cosmopolite is, remember I used to tell you in Maury that you were young Afro-American cosmopolites, and Maury used to say, I don't want to be no mopolite. He used to say that under his breath. But if you don't know what a cosmopolite is, think of the word cosmopolitan.
It's okay.
Think of the word cosmopolitan. A cosmopolite is somebody who is at home in the culture of the world, who is at home among all cultures, who's at home among all literate people, who's at home among all people who have been introduced to the class, like me. I'm a cosmopolite. You understand? You see, you know, I am just as at home listening to Bach as I am the blues. You understand? I love the son Montuno the same way I like, you know, jazz, you know, big American big band jazz. You know, I am as at home with Shakespeare as I am, you know, Amiri Baraka, you know, because I am a citizen of the world, you know, a really cultured person. That's what a cosmopolite is, all right? I've lectured at Harvard, at the Sorbonne in Paris, you know, and I get the same response everywhere. You know, wherever I am among literate, intelligent people, I'm cool. Whether it's the British upper class, you know, whom I spent some time with when I was in the boxing business. I went over there to raise money to promote the Sugar Ray Leonard Marvelous Marvin Hagler fight. And if you go on there and look at my bio, you'll see the pictures of me and Ray Leonard and all us when we were negotiating this, and you'll see the documents that this Euro investment group gave me, giving me the financial backing to make the fight. The only reason we didn't do it is because Sugar Ray got a detached retina and retired. But in any case, Johnson wanted to produce cosmopolites, and I'm the best example, you know, of what they produce. In any case, when you listen to the lyrics of this song, Lift Every Voice and Sing, this was a song that was intended to inspire. I listened to that dumbass Lorena Bobbitt, the white woman congressman from Colorado who thinks she's Calamity Jane or Annie Oakley or somebody, you know, running around want to bring guns into Congress and that kind of shit. She had a fit when Cheryl Lee Ralph gave that marvelous rendition with this black chorus of Lift Every Voice and Sing at the opening of the Super Bowl. Dumb broad, you understand? So, I don't know why we should be singing this. We have one national anthem. One reason to sing it is because no black people ought to ever sing the Star Spangled Banner. The Star Spangled Banner was written by Francis Scott Key, who was a third-generation slaveholder It was written during the Battle of Baltimore Harbor, during the War of 1812. The War of 1812, the British were the heroes to us in the War of 1812 because the main reason for the outbreak of the War of 1812, no matter the nonsense they tell you in school, is because the British had blockaded the west coast of Africa and was suppressing the slave trade, and Americans kept engaging in the slave trade, and they would stop these ships on the high seas and take their cargo. That's what they're talking about, impressing American sailors. No, the cargo they took was slaves, and they took them to Freetown in Sierra Leone. That's why the capital of Sierra Leone is named Freetown. And that's why when you go to Sierra Leone, you see that Africans are there from, you find people there who are part Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, all of it, because they would take them from these ships and they took them all to Sierra Leone, and so they're from everywhere. In any case, this is what sparked the War of 1812, and Francis Scott Key was a prisoner on a British man of war, which is a warship, during the Battle of Baltimore Harbor, and that's when he wrote the poem, Oh Say Can You See. It was later set to music from a British men's club, That's where they got the melody from, and it was later adopted as the national anthem. Now, so if you look at this national anthem and look at the third stanza, you see the third verse, it calls for the killing, the murder of any black people who attempted to seize their freedom during the War of 1812, because the British had said, if you come to our lines, all the black people who come to our lines, we will set you free. In the song, in the so-called national anthem, they called for the murder of black people who sought their freedom. That's another reason why we don't need to be singing it. But if none of that was true, we should be singing the Lift Every Voice to Sing, because it's a way better song, okay? Just from a musical point of view. It is what you would call American lieder. Now, lieder is a German term for art song. Songs like Ave Maria, ba-di-da-da-da-da. That's an art song. That's a lieder, German lieder. Lift Every Voice and Sing is a genuine American lieder, a genuine American art song, stanza upon stanza, written by a great composer and a great lyricist. So it's a better song. Musically it's better. Lyrically, there's no comparison at all. The lyrics are far superior to the lyrics of the Star Spangled Banner. The Star Spangled Banner is a white racist war song, a white nationalist war song. That's what it is. And they had nothing to do with us. All right? Now, I said it. You know what I mean? Said it, meant it. Show up anywhere and represent it.
Yeah, because the people that I grew up around, none of my friends, nobody ever respected.
As a matter of fact, your friend Tony, she became a big sensation up here because she was a basketball player at this college out here, and she refused to stand for it.
Yeah.
This is way before any of the NFL people did it. Your friend Tony was
doing it. My childhood best friend.
Yeah, and she became
Jewish. She's Jewish and black, and we played basketball together. And she went to SUNY Purchase in New York, and in 2003, it was like her senior year of college, and I think it was around that year. She was the captain of her basketball team, but she wouldn't salute the flag during the whole Star Spangled Banner because of the war and stuff. And she was getting death threats. I mean, it ended up being on CNN. It was national news. You had coaches of other teams talking about her, but even people on her team, black girls on her team, were actually threatening her and telling her, if you don't like the country, why are you here?
Because they're fucking idiots.
I know. And my friend Tony, she was a very light-skinned girl that you couldn't necessarily tell she was half black, but she had a sister. She had an older sister who was also half black. And her older sister was like my complexion and had curly hair. And they were raised by her Jewish mother. So she saw how people treated her sister differently. So she would talk about that. And she was a sociology major. And it's just, the people that I grew up around just had better sense than that. We just didn't.
Well, you went to a school for smart kids, exceptionally smart kids. So everybody.
And I went to New York City Public School my entire life.
But it was a New Horizon school. School for smart kids.
But I just have to point it out. But it's not just my high school, elementary, junior high. I think all my schools were good. And they were all public.
Yeah, they were all public schools. Yeah,
No, I just have to mention that because sometimes I always hear people only talk about public schools like it's all negative.
No, listen. First of all, let me just say this about New York public schools.
Well, we don't
when you look at the science competitions every year, more students from the New York public schools win these national science competitions than anybody. All right? So, and I'll tell you something else. the majority of the kids at Harvard come out of public school, not private schools. All right? So that's just, I mean, there's no private school that could compare with some of these public schools in New York, like Stuyvesant or Bronx Science.
So,
yeah.
Hold on. But so let's go back to...
Okay, so what I want to say is this. Yeah. I'm saying, the reason I got it talking about James Weldon Johnson when I was talking about how we would look at the slave market. When we passed by the slave market, I would hear the lyrics to Lift Every Voice and Sing, and we would look at the slave markets and we would think about it. This is a symbol of how far we have come. We didn't see it, as a reason for us, to be sad again. No, this is how far we've come. And if you listen to the lyrics of that song, you see it's saying we're going to keep on moving on. We're going to keep moving forward. All right? And so that's how I looked at that. But on this particular day, after passing by the slave market, the great cathedral was right across the street. And I go in there, and the usher came and told us we had to sit in the nigger pews, in the back of the church. I sat back there for a while because I watched the priest, and when the priest said that the Spirit of God was in the altar, I didn't believe it. So I dared God to strike me, I cursed him, dared him to strike me. I was so pissed off I was ready to die, and nothing happen. So I did it again, nothing happen. It's like that scene in Chinua Achebe, the great Nigerian novelist, his great novel, Things Fall Apart. The scene in Things Fall Apart when the British governor unmasked the ceremonial dancer and showed them that they believe, the people in the village believe, if you unmask this ceremonial dancer doing what is called an ancestor veneration ritual. These rituals in which they sing praises to the ancestors. And the dancers would come out of this sacred grove, and they were all taught if you ever pulled the mask off one of these dancers, you would die immediately. So the governor, once they found out that people believe that, during the height of the ceremony, he walks up and pulls off the mask, and nothing happens. They see it's just their neighbor, who's a member of a secret society. And it destroyed the belief system of a lot of these people. Their cosmology, was right. Well, that's what happened with me. I walked out of there, I never believed in none of that another day ever in my life. I was 13 years old. Because I decided that there's no just God could possibly be ruling over such an evil and unjust world. Such an evil, if these redneck crackers in Florida, if they were prospering, then whatever God was for them couldn't be for me. You understand? And I'm amazed at how religious black. Now, I'm not attacking people who are religious because, this religion has got a lot of our folks through. Without it, a lot of us would have succumbed to this oppression. I mean, I had a young guy to tell me down in Brunswick, Georgia, I was sitting down there smoking herb with some dudes, and I happened to just casually say I didn't believe in God, and the guy say, yeah, these are thugs. They're thugs I was with. The guy say, what you say, old school? He said, you say you don't believe in God. I said, no. He said, let me tell you something. You better be glad some of us believe in God, because if we didn't, you wouldn't be able to walk the street out here. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm not putting down people who are religious. I'm just telling you I'm not and why I'm not. All right? So that was the end of Jesus and all that with me, with them evil crackers in Florida. Okay, so now when I went to college at 17 years old. When I went to college, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be the next Thurgood Marshall, the next great civil rights lawyer. Because just a few years before, in 1954, he'd won the Brown decision, in which school desegregation was a landmark Supreme Court decision, and I was very, very impressed with that. And people used to always tell me, that the way I could talk and whatnot, you ought to be a lawyer. Now, my grandfather used to say, well, to be a good lawyer, you got to be a good liar.
That's true, though.
He used to say that all the time. He said, so you might make a lawyer, but the thing is that was what I wanted to do. But when I went to Florida A&M, that was the year, like I said, earlier in the year, Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba. And I saw, like I said, the jubilation of the black Cuban students and whatnot about this, and I saw how upset these rednecks in Florida were. You know, how Castro just seemed to drive them off the edge. So right away, I thought, you know, this is somebody who got to be, he was cool with me from the giddy up. The fact that these Southern crackers hated him so, you know, it was like, you know, it was evidence enough for me that he had to be doing something right. All right. So now that was in the fall. In the spring, the sit-in demonstrations began. They began in Greensboro, North Carolina, and it just spread like wildfire because all of us were there, you know, on these campuses. First of all, the African independence movement was raging. I mean, the first black African nation became independent in 1957, Ghana, under Dr. Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. Now, Martin Luther King had been invited to the independence ceremony of Ghana because they had read about him first of all, Nkrumah had studied here. Nkrumah went to Lincoln University, a black college in Pennsylvania. And then he did graduate study at the University of Pennsylvania. And then he lived for a while in Harlem. So Nkrumah knew us well, and his ideas were very much shaped by Afro-American ideas. He was the leading exponent of Pan-Africanism on the continent. And Pan-Africanism is a concept developed by Afro-Americans and West Indians. It's not an indigenous African concept. He was the one who took the idea of Pan-Africanism back to Africa. But in any case, Kwame Nkrumah, you know, he had deep ties among Afro-Americans, and he invited Dr. King to their independence ceremony in 1957. Well, Dr. King was very moved by that, you know, and he talked about it. And we were aware, you know, of the African independence. Kwame Nkrumah looked like my stepfather, you know. Abdel Gamal Nasser, who led the nationalist movement in Egypt, in the north of the Sahara, you know, in Arab Africa, you know, and they had become independent a few years earlier, and he looked just like my football coach, Mr. Mason, you know. So we identified with these African leaders, and we began to see people like Alex Quazon Saki, you know, brilliant Oxford-trained lawyer, you know, who became the ambassador here and whatnot, the ambassador of the United Nations. And they began to talk about the African personality and whatnot. And then we had African students on campus, and some of them were rich, you know. So we saw that there were things happening in the world, you know, with other black people. So when this movement came, first of all, at Florida A&M, it was like a powder keg anyway. Now there's a book that's called Writing Civil Rights, okay? This is the New American Library, and it's a collection of a lot of the best writing on the civil rights movement at the time. There's an essay in there by the great Afro-American novelist, James Baldwin, who's also just as powerful at essays as a novelist, if not more so. But Esquire magazine, I think it was, sent him down to Tallahassee to take a look at what was going on once we started the movement and to report on it. He wrote a piece, you can read it, in this collection, Writing Civil Rights. He wrote a piece called They Can't Turn Back. It was amazing to me when I read it. I read it when the book was published about 10 years ago. I was amazed because it was like he read our mind. You know, the way he described how black students felt was like he had read my soul, you know, because that's exactly how I felt. First of all, the year before I came up there, that spring semester, when they had their prom, you know, the spring prom, these two black couples, these two students, boys and girls, these two couples at Florida A&M had gone out on, there used to be a place we called Lover's Lane, you know, it's a dark place, you know, out on the edge of the country, and you could go out there and, you know, squeeze up and feel up your girlfriend and whatnot. So they went out to Lover's Lane, and they out there kissing and carrying on. And the next thing they know, there's these flashlights in the window. And it's these crackers, you understand, these Klan-type crackers, and they made them get out, they had shotguns. They made them get out of the car, and they raped the girls on the ground in their beautiful gowns. with the lights on and made the guys their dates watch them, rape them. We were the state. This is why when you see them like reverse Roe versus Wade, that enrages me. It enrages a lot of other people because at this time you couldn't. It was illegal for a woman to get an abortion. And when you hear these Republicans now, these crackers talking about passing these laws where there are no exceptions, not even for rape and incest, this is what comes back to mind for me. And this happened over 60 years ago, but it's like it happened yesterday. The Florida courts refused to allow this girl to have a medical abortion, and she was, one of the girls was pregnant with this white rapist baby on campus when I arrived there. It was like, devastating. I just wanted to do something, to get back at these crackers, to do something. So when the campus was like a powder keg. And so when we saw what happened, when we saw these students sit in Durham, right away it was clear to me, here's something I can do. Here's something we can do. And this thing just spread among the black colleges like wildfire. Florida A&M, we must have been the third or fourth college to get involved. We got involved in it very early. I can still remember exactly what I was doing when I first heard about it. I was sitting in the student union building. We had a student union building called the Ebony Lounge, and they used to have wonderful musical sessions because Florida A&M had, as I said, a world-renowned music program. And guys used to come in there and just, bands, just get up on the stage and play. And of course, then I came from a far more musically literate society than exists out here now. You know what I mean? I mean, we would have looked at people like, 50 Cent and Snoop Dogg and 2 Chainz. We'd have looked at them as...
But you know what? But you're also from the South. And I feel like the South is more musical than the North anyway.
Well, in any case...
Even now. Because when my twin brother went to Norfolk State, when we first went down to that campus and we saw those bands, that was like foreign to us. And we were like, wow. Because we didn't,
well, all these black schools had bands. Yeah. And they started in high school, right? I was in the band, and so we I don't know what else was I saying.
You were talking about the sit-ins and how it's.
Oh yeah. So what happened was, like, you had all these gifted and talented people there. In any field that you wanted to look at, mathematics, for instance, our mathematics professor, Dr. Anderson, was a consultant to Cape Canaveral. That was the center of the American space program at the time. That was before there was any such thing as an astronaut or whatnot. He was a professor of mathematics, and he was a consultant. Just like you saw that movie, Hidden Figures. Nobody ever heard of these black women who did all those calculations for those first space flights. I mean, these black women, if you all haven't seen this movie, Hidden Figures.
And your friend is, one of those women was her mother, right?
Yeah,
your
friend?
Michelle.
Michelle, yeah. Her mother was one of the first ones of them, And these black women, they were such great mathematicians that when John Glenn, the first man to orbit the Earth, when he got ready to go on that flight, IBM had come up with this big mainframe computer called UNIVAC. And when they brought the calculations for the trip, and they told him that it was done by this machine, he refused to get on the spaceship. He said, I'm not getting on there until she tells me that the numbers are right. This black woman, he wouldn't get on the ship until this black woman told him that the figures were right. So there were black people. There have been black people involved in everything that ever happened in this country, all right? And that's the reason why these racists, these white supremacists, want to prevent the teaching of black history. This whole critical race theory hokum, it's a hokum. Nobody's going to teach critical race theory to kids. Critical race theory is a sophisticated legal doctrine that's was developed at the Harvard Law School, the best law school in the country, and it's only taught to advanced law students. If you go on C-SPAN Book World, and put my name, Playthell Benjamin, in there, and you will see a recent lecture that I did, sponsored by the History Department at the University of Massachusetts, at a conference of distinguished historians, where I talk about this bogus argument around critical race theory. It's just an attempt to keep from teaching the real history of the United States because it is scandalous. It's shameful. You understand? And I'm writing a piece right now that I'll be through with in a couple of weeks or so, where I'm comparing Nazism to the racial system I grew up in the South, because the Nazis used the laws of the American South to develop Nazi law. Get that book over this week. Let me show them this book.
Okay.
It's right there.
The tan one, right?
No, the white one at the bottom. There's three. Look, pick the one at the bottom.
This
right?
one?
Yeah.
This
one?
one?
Yeah, to show you that I'm not just talking shit. You see what that says? Hitler's American model. You know, the United States and the making of Nazi race law. You see this? This book is written by James Q. Whitman. James Q. Whitman is a professor of law at Yale, one of the finest law schools in the world, and it was published by the Princeton University Press, which means that the Princeton University Press, like all university presses, are refereed presses. By refereed, what I mean is it's peer-reviewed, rigorously peer-reviewed. Before this book was published, 10 of the foremost authorities in the world on this subject critically read the manuscript. So you can rely on this. This is more reliable than the Bible. All right? Okay? This book here. And this shows how the Nazis used the racial laws of the system I grew up under in order to create their legal system, the Nuremberg laws that they used against the Jews in the Holocaust. They copied it from here, the United States of America. All right? And let me tell you this. He shows in this book that there's a couple of instances in which Nazis rejected American race law because they thought it was too severe. They thought it was too severe. Twice they rejected American race law because they thought it was too severe. The Nazis, okay? This is what they don't want you to learn. You know, this is what they're scared of when they're talking about critical race theory. And their children feel bad. Of course they're going to feel bad. How can they not feel bad about what happened? It's human. They'd be inhuman not to feel bad. But here's my point. I taught thousands of white students black history, you know, and you can see I'm not the sort to bite my tongue. There's a way that you can teach this where young students today don't have to feel guilty. I have right now you saw the video that my former student made, white student. He's now a professor of history himself. You know, I'm putting together a documentary on me, and you'll eventually be able to see this. But I have a white student. He's now a professor of history. He says that my class was the most stimulating and intellectually stimulating and valuable class that he took through his whole college career.
So this is the perfect time to go into how he became a professor with no college degree.
Yeah, I have no degrees, but that's a long ways off.
But you were at Florida A&M, and the student sit-ins happened, and that has something to do with it.
Well, what happened is this. Here's what set me on the trajectory to eventually become a history professor. It began when I was in a geography class, and we were studying the great rivers of the world. And we came to the Nile. And the professor pointed out that the Nile was the longest river in the world, and that it ran through the heart, it ran through Egypt, and it ran through the heart of Africa and emptied into the Mediterranean, and Egypt was in Africa. And I looked on the map, and I saw Egypt was in Africa, and I was shocked because I was a big fan of a movie at the time. It was called Land of the Pharaohs. And everybody in it was white. And here I am looking at the map and see that Egypt is in Africa. That's fired up my imagination. You know, I wanted to know more about this. How could they be white and this is in Africa? That's what first began to fire up my imagination. Then I was out on the demonstrations, and I looked at how crazy these white racists were, foaming at the mouth. You know what I mean? Because we want to buy a damn cup of coffee. And I wondered, what is the matter with these people? You know, how did we get in a mess like this? You know, and what were we before we got in this mess? And how are we going to get out of it? it's these three questions that dictated the course of my life. It's these three questions that I asked as a freshman at Florida A&M in 1960 that led me to become one of the founders of the first Black Studies department in the world, the W.B. Du Bois Department of Black Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 1969. You know, by the end of the decade, I was a founder, one of the founders of the first Black Studies department in the world, the first degree-granting Black Studies department in the world. Right? So those three questions drove the course of my life. Now, once I got involved in these demonstrations, the administration of the school didn't support us the way I thought they should. Of course, now let me say this. I was a teenager, you know, full of them and vigor, 17 years old, no idea about the kind of responsibilities they had on them. They were trying to keep the university alive because these crackers were threatening to shut the school down because of these demonstrations. So they had to walk a very tight line. You know, they wouldn't come out against us, but they couldn't thoroughly support us, and they were trying to ask us, to appeal to us, you know, to move, you know, moderation and moderate some of our demands and whatnot. We were in no mood to compromise. I certainly was not. My mother called me up when she saw it on TV, and she said to me, "Are you involved in the trouble up there?" I said, "Yeah, I am." She said, "But you can't be involved in that." She said, "That's dangerous." She said, "You know, you're my only son." I said, "Listen, Mom, everybody up here is somebody's son. And I've got to do this. You know, and after I got through talking to her, she saw what I meant. And she said, you know, I'll pray for you, you know. But I lost all, between the fact that the administration didn't support us the way I thought, and that when I saw the way those snuff-chewing cracker judges down in Florida talked to the finest black attorneys in the state who came to represent the students that were arrested, I lost faith, you know, in the power of education, and which I'd been told was the answer to everything, you know, and I was lost there for a moment. I mean, when I went to Florida A&M, when I first got there, to me, I was like Alice in Wonderland, you know. Now, the community I grew up in, graduating from high school was a very big deal. You know, people would buy you expensive presents. I mean, my sister, who graduated the year before me, my sister Melba, she got 8 expensive watches, Boulevard and Elgin watches. You know, everybody decided to buy her an expensive watch. So I went to them and told them, "Look, I'm not telling you how much money to spend on me, but please do not buy me a watch." You know, and I told him, I said, you know, my granddaddy had this beautiful gold Hamilton watch that was a pocket watch. And he had told me that he had 2 of them. And he told me if I ever graduated from high school, he would give me one of them. You know, it's a pocket watch with the gold chain. I mean, I got one like it over here now, except it's sterling silver. Only it is the kind of timepiece that only the most elegant gentlemen wear. All right, and I wear mine on special occasions. I have pictures of me profiled and styling with it. Anyway, the thing is that I told my relatives, I said, if you plan to buy me a watch, you could buy me a tailor-made suit for the same price. You know, I had the price and came to tailor, the leading tailoring house. Now, I had a fondness for tailor-made suits because, well, first of all, my grandfather, who was my step-grandfather, my mother's second husband, which I'll talk about later. Her first husband was unbelievable, and then this guy was a remarkable guy. This guy was from the Bahamas, and he had been trained on Savile Row in London, which trained the greatest tailors in the world. In the 1950s, Pop was the head of the coat-making division for Daroff's Botany 500, which was the top suit you could buy off the rack in America. And he had 1,500 tailors working under him. He hired and fired them all. He's the first one to teach me about the importance of mastering your trade. Mastering your trade. You know what I mean? Now, so in any case, So my role models for dressing was, aside from the men in my family, my Uncle Jimmy, you know, my Uncle Walter, was people like Billy Eckstein, you know, one of the best dressed men in the world. He had a special shirt with the roll collar, the Mr. B collar, you know, with the Winslow knot. I ended up going to college. I had a tailor-made suit for every day in the week, you know. They used to call me Gorgeous George. That was my nickname. And there was another dude named Beautiful Cody Jones. You know, we were the sharpest guys on campus. But everybody was sharp. You know, there's another dude called Down Brown. He was a midget. He was dressed to kill. Another dude called Student Body. He was a big fat guy, you know, and he was dressed to kill. You know, another dude named Headquarters, big head motherfucker. You know, and he was dressed. We had in Black Magic, Bobby Timmons from Miami, who was a great pianist. You know, Spider from Detroit. I mean, we had, you know, people. It looked like the Ebony Fashion Fair every day on campus. The girls wore heels to class. You know what I mean? This kind of slovenliness. I talk about black male fashion before and after the hip hop disaster. That's the way I decided. And matter of fact, I had a solo photo exhibition here called The Elegance of Afro-America. Black style is a weapon of liberation. At another point, I'm going to talk about that and show you some of my photographs and tell you how black style, our high style, was actually a weapon of liberation. You understand? Now that's something that's been lost.
I feel like that's true. I feel like that's true with a lot of our arts, you know, like with our hair, with our dancing, with our music, with, you know, like all those things. Yeah.
But so you know, so when I went to Florida A&M, the best and the brightest black kids from Florida, from the Caribbean, from Africa, were all on this campus. You know, we used to have Sunday afternoon forums where we would engage in deep conversations headed by, there were three deans. There was Dean Gordon, who had a PhD from Columbia. There was Dean Miles, who had a PhD from Yale. There was Dr. Gore, who had a PhD from Harvard, and the first thing you learned when you got on campus was how he had to work shoveling coal through the night to keep his rich white classmates warm at Harvard, and he graduated at the top of his class. We had when Dr. Du Bois in 1903 called for the creation of the talented 10th, this is what he was talking about. When he said that the Negro race, like all races, will be saved by their exceptional people because they're the ones who will set the standards and will guide the masses away from the worst in their own and other races, right? And point us to high ground. I grew up in a community where it was run by the talented 10th, you know, by the smartest, the best, and the brightest black people. And the standards they set for us were second to none. How else could you produce a Martin Luther King, you know, in a racist, segregated society? How could you produce a Julian? How could you produce? Look at Condoleezza Rice. She's a shameless husband, a wicked witch. Like I call her the wicked witch of the West, you know, because she's a shill for these Republicans. I mean, she was, you know, but she was Reagan's advisor on Russian nuclear war policy. A young black woman. You know how smart she had to be in a position like that? Now, even though I disagree with her politically, this white woman scholar wrote a book on her, about it, and she named it Twice as Good, right? Because that's what we were taught. We were taught we had to be twice as good as white people. That's the standard they set for us. Condoleezza Rice is not only an expert on the Russian military and nuclear warfighting plans, she was also a world-class ice skater. You know, she's also a world-class classical pianist. You know, she's a brilliant polymath. You know, and she came from Birmingham, Alabama, one of the worst places on earth. You know, where I grew up in St. Augustine was like paradise compared to Birmingham, Alabama. You know, and you know who else came from Birmingham, Alabama? Angela Davis. Angela Davis, another brilliant brainiac. And her and Condoleezza grew up in the same neighborhood, and they went in two completely different directions. Condoleezza went all the way to the right and became a shill for the plutocrats the white elite, and Angela Davis became a revolutionary.
This
You know,
this
yes.
video is going to end in like 7 minutes, and then we'll have to restart it. But so we're almost an hour in, and so as you see, there's so many different ways the conversation can go. But I still want to get to how you got out of Florida.
Well, we will get there, but I can't say when.
No, but that's why I'm coming to keep you on track.
Yeah.
So I want to get to.
But I don't
okay,
think
so
I think all these things are relevant though to understand.
No. I think it's all relevant. But I'm saying those are relevant. But I'm saying you have a lot of relevant things that you could say for like all day. So I'm just trying to bring it back. It is relevant.
Okay, all right. Well,
so because the video is about to end and then we'll restart it.
Well, let me just say this. Mm-hmm. I stopped going to class. I became completely disillusioned, and I ended up getting all incompletes. And plus, I cut the fool at a rally, threw a brick, when the dean of men was speaking, and I got suspended for a semester. So I went back to St. Augustine that summer, and Hank Thomas, my boyhood friend, he had gone to Howard. Lord Irvin had gone to Fisk. All of us who had gone off to college had been involved in the movement. Hank Thomas would soon become famous. He's the one that's pictured in one of the most iconic pictures from the Civil Rights era. That picture when these crazy redneck crackers in Anniston, Alabama, firebombed the bus that the first Freedom Riders. He was one of the first Freedom Riders. He was on that bus. He was the first National Field Secretary for Corps. And that iconic picture of the bus in flames and this big, tall, dark-skinned guy walking out of the bus into this raging white mob. It's easy to find it. It's one of the most iconic pictures. It was on the front pages of papers all over the world and news reports everywhere, and he became world famous. Not long after we had spent the summer together. But when we all came back to St. Augustine for that summer, all of us had been involved in the movement where we went off to college. Now, there was a black college in St. Augustine. It's in Miami now. But it was a private school. It was called Florida Memorial. And we got back during the summer when school was out of session. But we started a bit of a movement in St. Augustine. We started trying to start a movement there. And we went and sat down, at the counter at Woolworths and what have you. And we were just beginning to try and start a movement there when the white folks in the town were caught completely off guard because they had convinced themselves that that there was no race problem. Cut the light on up in the ceiling.
No, I'll do that when we restart the video.
Yeah, but you can't hardly see us.
I know, but the video's about to end.
Yeah.
But the next video, I'll put on more light. The video's ending in 1 minute, so just talk.
All right. Well, anyway, I'll tell you about what happened.
Okay.
How we tried to start a movement in St. Augustine and why I left. All right.
And then we're gonna get out of Florida and get to the good part. All right. See you in the next video. We're gonna restart it over.